especially in these COVID times. Not all of us have been traveling as much, so I love to hear about everyone's travels and explorations. So very excited. With us is Clemente Jaquez. Clemente is the Architecture and Design Foundation Scholarship Chair, and he will be moderating a Q&A with Belén. If you have a question, we are in Zoom webinar, so we can't see all of your faces, but please feel free to drop a question in the Q&A feature, and Clemente will keep an eye on that, and I'm sure he has some questions for when Belén is in the hot seat. But let's go ahead and get started. Take it away, Belén.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie, for the intro. Thank you both for joining, and thank you all for listening. So I'm just going to dive right in. Greenland. Kalalit Nunat. That is Greenlandic for people of the land. And that is what the people of Greenland call it. They don't call it Greenland. Anyway, so why Greenland? I decided to go to Greenland because it is one of the most remote places in the world. And also climate change as a hot topic. I thought this would be a really great thing to explore. But diving deeper into that, in my graduate studio at UT Arlington, I took a studio by Amanda Aman, which focused on the fragile fields of the Arctic. And we took an in-depth research dive into the effects of climate change on Greenland. And then what we developed throughout the semester, an architectural response. It took very, very little to really grasp my interest, but I became extremely passionate about learning anything about Greenland, especially the people. So I was encouraged by Amanda to apply to the fellowship to go to Greenland. So where is Greenland? This is just an aerial that shows where it's at relatively and on the map. It's a little distorted, but it is within the North American continent, but it belongs to the Kingdom of Denmark. And I went to 3 cities. I went to Copenhagen, Nuke, and Ululusat. This is just like a little summary. I went to Nuke because that's the capital city of Greenland. And actually, if you can see my cursor.
Hey Belén, I think is your screen changing? It's not changing.
Yes.
Okay, I just see Greenland. There it is.
How about?
I see it now.
How about?
I see
okay.
that. I see a map. Thank you.
Perfect. So there's Greenland, and here's the map. Thank you. Thank you. And can you see my cursor, Clemente?
Yes, I can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so I went to 3 cities. I went to Copenhagen, and then Nuke, and then Ululusat. And the reason I went to Denmark is because, like I mentioned earlier, Greenland belongs to the Kingdom of Denmark. And as of today, there's no way to get to Greenland unless you fly in from Copenhagen or from Iceland. All right, so Nuke was my first, well, it was Copenhagen, then Nuke, and I'll talk about COVID travel towards the end if there's some time. But Nuke was the first city. It's the capital city, population about 18,000 people. This is on a cold September evening. In this panoramic, what I love about it is that you can really see the layers of culture that Nuke holds. For example, you see the Red Church. That is one of the oldest churches that was established by a Norwegian missionary, Hans. And then towards the left, you can see Nuke Center, which is the tallest building in Greenland, which also houses the government, a mall, and a restaurant in the bottom floors. It's really, really cool. And then towards the left of the image, you can see the older homes, the color-colored iconic homes. And then you can see the transition towards the right of the image, where you see these bigger apartment developments. And that's pretty much how Nuke is laid out. You can see the old harbor and then the newer areas. Oh, and this photo was taken from a hill with the statue of Hans overlooking the coast behind us. Well, the sea behind us, and then the coast. And you can still see my screen, right? Alrighty. So this is the church that I spoke about. And what was really interesting about this image is, as I was walking towards it, there was actually a funeral in process. So I wanted to be very respectful and not take up close photos. So I just stood way at the back and observed. And what was a really also special moment is I didn't see any fancy bouquets or giant arrangements of flowers. Because Greenland, it's really hard for things and flowers and trees to grow there. So all I saw were just like small little wild flowers that you would pick from maybe the sides. I also made a stop by the Nuke Art Museum because, I mean, that's where you start whenever you're trying to study the culture of a place or the history. And this also used to be a church, and then it became an art museum, and they added a new addition, which you can see here. This photo was taken from inside of the new addition, and they have art ranging from really famous, what they used to call Greenland painters, to local artists. Oh, and it was free, so that was really awesome. And this is Nuke Center. You can see how the bottom has a storefront, the ground floor has a storefront, and you can just go in there and shop. You obviously can't go up to the top floors. And down on the left side, that's where you have the restaurant. And what's also interesting about this building is that the building time frame in Greenland is very short because it's so cold and the weather is truly unforgiving. So a lot of these components had to be imported in systems, like wall systems, and you just import all of them in, and then they build as fast as they can to get this up. And this is going back to the residential Old Harbor area. Another interesting thing about Nuke or Greenland in general is that when you want to build a house, you don't have to draw your plot, and you don't really have property lines. You can pick any spot, orient it whichever way you want, as long as you are not within, I believe, 6 feet closer to the other house. You need at least 6 feet between your houses. And that's just due to fire. But I think it makes it truly beautiful. It grows organically. Now this is a city with 18,000 people, so it works. I'm not saying that should be applied here. However, it just speaks to the place. And you can also notice here that there are no front or backyards. The landscape is your front and your backyard. And these are some of the more, these are some of the newer apartment complexes. On the left one, you can see an older apartment complex when the Danish started to really influence Greenland's architecture. They would build apartment blocks versus single-family homes. And so this is a story of the Hotel Aurora, inspired by the beautiful northern lights. And the story behind this image is actually about a person. Throughout the trip, you'll hear me say that. So, throughout the presentation, you'll hear me say this is in relation to a person. This is the biography of the human adaptations to climate change, but you will not see portraits of people. And that is also to protect the people's their privacy. That's something I did notice in Greenland, is that it's a very small community. So you can't really just come in and flash a camera in people's faces. That's not how it works. It takes time to build that relationship with someone, and it takes time to really get on a personal level. Luckily, through Instagram, during the semester, I got to meet some people, and I specifically targeted people who were in the tourism industry, because those are the people that want to outreach as well, and who would be more open. So after reaching out to a few, I reached out to Josefa, who works at this hotel. She also used to be a teacher. She's from Nuke. And I got to message her on Instagram. She invited me to eat some pizza, because they do have pizza at this hotel, and we had coffee, and I just got to ask her questions about what it was like growing in Nuke. And she got to share a lot, and she did share that she has seen a lot of change, a lot of new developments are coming up, and that's just because the tourism industry is growing, and that's just the way to go. In Greenland, at least, in Nuke, which is the biggest city. And she also has an Instagram page called Faces of Greenland that was inspired by the New York, Humans of New York, which I thought was really interesting. When I was taking a walk, I also went to the hospital. I work in healthcare architecture, so I really wanted to go see this hospital. And this is Queen's Ingrid Hospital. It holds about 130 beds, and it is the largest hospital in all of Greenland. So if there is something that someone needs and they don't have it in Greenland, they will actually fly them to Denmark. You can see the chapel, which is open air, and then you go in through a door. I tried really hard getting a tour. However, they do have really strict COVID laws in Greenland, and that is because they don't have the resources we have here. The settlements are miles and miles away. There are no roads that connect settlements to each other. For instance, it's like saying, so I'm in Denver right now, and most of you are in Dallas. It's like saying that there are no roads between Denver and Dallas. So you have to fly all the time. That's really expensive. So all of that to say, I was not able to go inside the hospital, and I respect that. So I just got to walk around it. While in Nuke, I also visited the Kiptuak Cultural Center. And I actually found myself going back to this place several times, because every time I went inside, there was something different going on. Here's a Greenland flag, by the way. I think it's quite beautiful. And the red at the bottom signifies the ocean. The red at the top signifies the sun. And the white at the bottom signifies the beautiful icebergs. And the white at the top, the sky. And so going back to the Tuak, the architecture was influenced also by the Northern Lights. You can see the wavy organic forms. And inside there's a really nice skylight that lets the light in really beautifully. Whether it's during the day or at night, in the evening, the lighting really does transform the space, much like it does outside. Here's the entry. And the side entry, I really did think this was a really nice building. It's 3 stories tall. It's not overly massive, and it sits in the center of Nuke. It's a really good gathering space. And while I was there, I actually got to attend a film festival. It just so happened that the Nuke International Film Festival was going on at the same time I was there. So I got to listen to a musician that I still listen to on Spotify. I'm more than happy to share that with you all. And I also got to watch films done and produced and acted by local Greenlanders. That was really special. And again, same space, and completely transformed. During the day, they have tables. It's a cafe. You go in, get a cup of coffee, and you eat something. Another really important thing about this space is that it's a gathering place for a very diverse group. You can have young kids to older generations, and you gather in the same space. And that speaks to their tradition, because the Inuit culture, and Inuit, those are the indigenous peoples of Greenland. In the Inuit culture, you would have, their tradition would be passed down orally. So you would sit around with your grandparents and they would tell you stories. And that's how the culture was passed down. There was no book. There were songs and there were dances, but everything was acted or orally passed down. So Ketuak really embodies not only that, but the contemporary way of storytelling, music, theater, and dance. And so despite all of the changes in Nuke happening really fast, and by changes, I mean a change of culture, where as before you would have people were self-sustaining before Danish rule and before climate change. And now the city seeing higher temperatures, but again, warmer weather means more visitors for longer periods of time during the year. So Nuke is really pushing for attractions, but not only for tourists, but attractions for the locals that we can both enjoy alike. Like this boardwalk. This is a newer boardwalk that goes along the coast. It is planned to wrap the entire coast of Nuke, which is really awesome. And it's really well lit at night, so you feel safe. And I got to walk it later at night, and it was really, really peaceful. I also got to walk it the next morning because I had a boat tour to catch. And okay, I'm going to be honest, I did not walk it. I had to jog through this because I had to catch a boat for the tour. I didn't mention earlier that the hour difference from here to Copenhagen, from Denver to Copenhagen, is 8 hours. Copenhagen to Nuke is 4 hours. So the jet lag was real. And so I also did a boat tour in Nuke, because to experience Greenland, you can experience it from the air, from land, but also from the sea. And I think it's really important if you really want to understand the scale of the place, you need to try to experience as much as you can. So there is icebergs in Nuke, but they're a bit far removed from the city. You can see them from the city, they're just going to be a little bit farther away. And this is the first iceberg that I saw, so I'm always going to remember this image. It's just, it's strikingly beautiful. And something to note is that they're always different. You're never going to see an iceberg that looks just like another. Or you can see the same iceberg and then you come back the next day and it looks totally different. From the water, I caught, and also from the air, to the right is an image from the plane flying out of Nuke. You can see how snowy it was, and this is September. And on the right, you can see it for the prison from the sea. So there is a new prison in Nuke. It is the first official prison, because historically speaking, if someone did something bad, they would just kick them out of the village. And you really couldn't go to another village. You are up to your own self out in the tundra, which is really, really crazy. But as times progressed, people would go to jail in Denmark. Most recently, there is a new prison, which is actually more like a rehab center. inmates get to actually go and get a job or have a job, go to their jobs during the day, but they come and they sleep here. They can go out and do things that they have to do as long as they come back. So I thought that was really cool. Also didn't get to tour this place, but I got to see it from far. And then also from the water, we made a stop by Nuke, which is an abandoned settlement of the Nuke Fjord. And like this settlement, there are actually many others. And what's really special about this one is that our captain, our boat captain, he took us there. We got to get off the boat, and then we got to walk around all of the houses. And what happened here is that in the 80s, the Danish, along with the Greenlandic government, relocated everyone from this village to Nuke because they saw it more profitable for fishermen to work in Nuke in a commercial fishery rather than do their own fishing. And these rails are actually where they would have little carts where they would put the fish. And they had everything figured out. The residents here were self-sustaining. Once they were relocated to Nuke, these homes were sold as vacation homes. And these residents actually were relocated into tiny, tiny apartment blocks, very much like the first ones that we saw, the older ones, the wooden apartment blocks. And that was a huge design issue on Denmark's behalf, because if you think about it, people here, their lifestyle was, we go hunt and we have fish, or we have musk ox, and we need somewhere to dry them. And so people would actually set their game on balconies, or you have the big fur coats because you're out hunting in freezing cold weather, and then you can't really even get into your small apartment. So those are just some of the ways that people had to adjust to living. This is a church. There was a really small church, and you can tell how thick the wall is by the window sill. It's really, really crazy. And then this is seal skin. I've never seen a church with seal skin. So the architecture speaks of the place, but also of the time. And these are the stairs that we actually went. We got on them to get on the island, which are the original stairs from many, many years ago. And while I'm in this image, a really interesting fact about this stop is that our captain actually grew up in this settlement. He was a kid. He was just a kid when his family got relocated to Nuke. And he did share with us a really tough story to hear, but he lost his mother to suicide because she could not adjust to the change of environment. And like her, are many other stories as well from tiny, tiny villages, population 80, that were removed from their home and put in tiny apartment blocks. And he knew of one person who bought their home back. There's a family who just worked and worked until they could make enough money to buy their own home back, which is just crazy to me. And when he shared this story, it was all in Danish. Everyone on the tour boat spoke Danish or Greenlandic, except for one person, two people who spoke English. So they were kind of translating to me on the side. And it was a really memorable moment, to say the least. And so Ululusat, shifting gears to Ululusat, which is about almost 200 miles above the Arctic Circle. my itinerary here was similar to Nuke, where it focused on architecture, but also lots of nature, because nature is equally as important to the architecture, and it shapes people's lives just as much. And I also took a boat tour in Ululusat. It is a fishing village. It is population almost 6,000 people. This image was taken from my taxi ride from the airport to my hotel. And the reason I have Poe on the corner is because I wanted to remember my taxi driver's name. And he spoke a little bit of English, but just enough. And I asked him questions. Again, it was a little tough to just strike a conversation with just anyone, because people are more reserved, generally speaking. And I asked him, hey, Poe, so, if you're from Ululusat and you have a friend come from out of town, where's the first place that you take them here? And to my surprise, he said, my home for a warm meal, which to me also gave me an insight into the close-knit community that is to live in such a small place. Because if you were to ask me, hey, Belén, where's the first place that you take people in Denver? I would 100% say City O City, the restaurant down the street. I thought that was really special. And I asked Poe that, but I also asked Josefa from Nuke the same question, and she said the same thing. She said I would take them to my home for something to eat at their home. Ready? So much like Nuke, I went to a museum in Ululusat on one of the first few days just to learn and to see some cool artifacts. This is a museum that is based, it has a lot of history on Knud Rasmussen, who was a Greenlandic Danish explorer. And this was an old house built in 1917, I believe. And something that you've probably noticed is textures are so, they tell a story that words almost can't describe. So for most images, I tried to get a close-up of the texture, whether it's paint or wood or concrete, it kind of gives you like a feel for it. In that same museum, there were some turf homes right outside of it that were actually built by locals in the 70s. And they were built to pass down the history of how people used to live. So stereotypically, people think, oh yeah, they live in igloos. And that's actually quite true, but only in the winter. In the summertime, the Inuit would have something that looks something more like this, which is a turf home. It's actually really cool. I got to go inside. You can see how many other people have also gone inside by the snow on the ground. And I wish I knew this before, but people in Greenland actually have a culture of taking off your shoes before you enter the home. And that's because of the snow. So I really wish I knew that, but I clearly did not at this point. And this, one more thing on this cool turf home is that the locals that built it in the 70s, they actually, when they were younger, used to live in similar huts. And here's an image of the interior. It was actually really, really cozy with all of the fur pieces laying around. And these are images from inside of the museum. I thought the window views were also really interesting. Each one tells a different story. For example, the one on the far left, you can see the older homes, very much in the same style as the ones in Nuke in the old harbor. And then you can see the apartment blocks in the middle image, which are the same ones that I was referring to, that the Danish built And then people would have to hang things on the balconies. People are actually doing things here now. And on the far right, you can see the Zion Church. And then you can see the dog sleds. And then some more homes in the sea. I did take a walk by the Zion Church. Couldn't go inside because it was under repair, but I did get to walk around it. I do have to add, Ululusat has been the coldest I have ever experienced in my life. I don't think I experienced negative temperatures, but it was in the single digits, so it was very cold. And my days here ended a lot earlier than in Nuke because the sun would set earlier and it would get really, really cold. So I would just go and explore and do as much as I could and then go to the hostel. Here's another image of Ululusat homes. These are not the older ones, but these are not like the huge apartment blocks. And something really, really cool about this image is if you can see where the cursor is, you can see some fur hanging from the balcony. And that is just a recurring theme. I'm guessing they washed it, but what's really funny about this image is I did not even notice until I was looking at the image. You can also see snowmobiles, which are very popular there. And you can also see sled dogs right where my cursor is. There was actually a colony of sled dogs right here. And they sleep outside, but that's what they've adapted to. So on the boat tour, I got to embark on this crazy journey to Eki Sedmia, which is one of the most active glaciers in the world. And it was about a 10-hour boat ride. And while I was on the boat, I got to just sketch a little bit on the route. So here's the fjord, not to scale, and here's Ululusat. And it is, if you go straight through it, it's about 40 miles north. But of course, we went through the ice, through the sea. And this is an early image. This is an image of early in the day of just massive chunks of ice, massive. While on the boat ride, our captain also had his fair share of stories to share. And Ululusat being a place where the dog sled culture, it's dominating. At one point, I think, and this is what I heard from the locals, at one point there were more dogs than people in Ululusat. And that's because the sea ice freezes. And so the people rely on dogs to go hunting. Whereas in Nuke, but also fishing is huge here as well. In Nuke, it's more about fishing. So if you can see, this is quite astonishing, really. You can see this smaller flat area that actually used to be an old dog sled route. However, because the sea is not freezing like it used to anymore, it is impossible to rely on dogs for hunting trips like it was before, like they were able to before. Some very brave hunters still do so. It's just not the same route, nor is the season as long. So dogs are used for tourism a lot. And it's really ironic, but people have to make livelihoods somehow, right? And when our captain told us the story, it opened my eyes, because when I first saw this uninhabitable piece of land covered in snow and in a freezing place, after he shared that, I saw opportunity. This is a place where people made opportunities to survive. And so fast forward to a few hours later, we reach Eki Sedmia, which spans about 3 miles long. And we could only get this close so that we wouldn't risk getting stuck or as we got closer. But this was really, really incredible as well. This glacier is actually predicted to be a dead glacier in about 50 years. And that's a lot of ice. But again, this, I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, but this presentation was not about how much ice Greenland has lost. It's much more about the experience of people adapting and how they are just moving forward with the changes, because the Greenlanders have some of the smallest footprints on the planet. So they really can't stop it. Also, so back to Ululusat after the long boat ride. On the hike, I went on this hike with a local called Ilu, and I also met her on Instagram. She is also in the tourism industry. And this is one of the first things we saw while on the hike. These are dogs, sled dogs, and they actually are not kept indoors, nor are they kept at people's homes. There's actually colonies of dogs in patches of open land. So as long as they're chained and they have each other, they're going to be fine. And some of them have little houses, but you can see them just as you're walking by. It's really quite incredible because the dog colonies are kind of in the same area. So in the morning while we were walking, we could hear them howling, and it was just magical to hear that. And then I actually saw these footprints, which was really terrifying, but also kind of exciting at the same time. And terrifying because these footprints were on the road, and the dogs, if they're chained, should not be able to reach the road. And the reason they're chained is because these are not your typical domestic dogs. These are dogs who, for a living, hunt. So there are signs everywhere, and mostly in English for good reason. Do not pet dogs. And that's just because you run the risk of either agitating them or something, getting hurt. But they're really quite beautiful. And one last cool fact is that you really cannot bring dogs from outside of the Arctic up to the Ululusat, because then you would change, or they just don't want their breed to be interfered with. Here's a good example of a dog colony. This one was cute because they all have names, and you can just see how it was really cold, but instead of being inside, they prefer to just curl into a little ball and sleep on top or outside on the side of the little houses. And while on the hike, we also saw this cemetery, which is, again, it goes back to the minimal footprint. It's a really old cemetery, and because this is on a UNESCO World Heritage Site, you can't just go and walk all over it. And while I was there, I just tried my best to be the most respectful visitor ever, because it is preservation. So I enjoyed the scenery from far. And it kind of speaks also to the people, how blended the cemetery is with the landscape. It's not this huge over the top stone. It is a wooden cross, very, very light on the ground. And as we got through the hike, it got a little bit easier because the first few chunks were really rocky and covered in snow, and the trail markers were blue painted dots on rocks. Sometimes we couldn't see them, so we would have to go and clean all the rocks as we progressed upwards. But towards the end of the hike, it's about 4 miles, by the way, there's wooden slats on the ground that then lead you to the Ice Fjord Center. And the wooden the panels on the wooden pieces on the ground, what those do is help preserve the nature around it as well. Because if it was just one trail, it would be so easy to get off trail, right? But why it's so important to preserve these grounds is also because this used to be an old settlement. This general area used to be like a population also very low, maybe about 60 or 80 in that range. But to keep everything as pristine as possible, you just stick to the walking path. And I think that's a really great design element where it positively reinforces you to stay on the trail. And once you reach the top of the trail, you get a front row seat to the Ululusat Ice Fjord. And in this image, you can see a small, tiny boat with what looks like it's two men. And in Ululusat, although commercial fishing is also a big means for their economy, people still take their small boats and go out to fish, which is really incredible, but also really risky because these giant chunks of ice can just collapse at any time, and that can create really dangerous tsunami waves. So from just reading and from visiting and talking to people, only those that are extremely skilled at being quick on their feet to think about the changing of the winds or clouds rolling in can actually go confidently and fish on a smaller boat. And as you keep going on the walkway, the trail will take you to the newly opened Ululusat Ice Fjord Center, designed by Dort Mandrup from Denmark. This center opened in summer of 2021. So just as a few months before I arrived. So it was really exciting. My professor Amanda had told me about it in studio, and like for a whole year, I would just keep up with the progress and the opening date. So it was really cool. And this center is actually the first of 6 planned visitor centers in Greenland. And it is the cause of the site becoming a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So because Ululusat now has this responsibility to bring awareness to its locals, to climate, to global leaders, and then just to the general public at large about how we are losing a lot of ice at extremely alarming rates. But it also, besides that, I think the center does a really good job at sharing the culture of the Greenlandic people. The exhibits inside are twofold. It's about nature, but it's also about people because it's one, right? It's just one. And that can be, that concept, you can see that anywhere that you travel in the world. The architecture will be different, the people will be different, and the landscape will be different, but it all impacts each other. They all impact one another. And this image on the left was taken from one of the planes. It's the first time I saw the center, and you can see the fjord in the back. Then on the right image, that's just as you arrive upon it. The architects did speak to the design, and they also wanted it to be light on the ground, which is a recurring theme in all of Greenland, just light on the ground. And one last thing I'd like to point out is you can actually see the trail. It's a really well-marked trail, which makes me really happy to know people actually stay on the trail. This is, as you approach the building, it's got this very, very sleek, just calming feel to it. And yes, it was snowing. It was snowing so much that day. And we walked the whole thing. And this is inside the building. Something really cool was you have to take off your shoes before going in. Again, that ties back to culture. Even in little ways, you can incorporate the memory of a place or the practice of a tradition and implement it into something new. And it was really fun just being there and barefoot in a really beautiful place. Well, not barefoot, with socks in a very beautiful place. Here it is looking outwards. And during this hike with Pilu, I had 5 awesome hours to chat with her just about her experience. Even at the young age of 21, she's done so much already. And by so much, I mean she's studying to become her own captain, like a boat captain. She wants to do her own trips and excursions. And I think that's really cool. It also speaks to the youth of Greenland, where she's from Nuke, but since she wants to really be on the water with the big glaciers and icebergs, she had to relocate to Ululusat to pursue that dream of hers. Here's another image of the center. And so in conclusion, I did mention I went to Copenhagen, and just for time's sake, I did not include those images, but you can see it on the report that we can share with you afterwards. It's an online report that the ADEX has published. But in conclusion on this Greenlandic piece, what I took from it is that the people are very much like the icebergs. And the people identify with the place, and the place identifies also with the people. There's the ice is like shaped by the wind, by the water, by external forces and elements, and it keeps going from ice to water, water to ice, to rain. People very much in the same sense are they're adapting. For thousands of years, the people of Greenland have adapted to unpredictable weather, much more now than ever. They adapted to Danish colonization, and again, now they're adapting to the changing times. And I hope you have a lot of questions. There's so much to cover.
Belén, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, so much of your experience. I've learned so much already, and I do have a few questions to follow up. I would encourage those that are online to ask questions. I will certainly read those as they come. But very inspiring, very inspiring. I enjoyed, first of all, a few different things. Your way of presenting. I think the topic and what I see in front of us, I think it blends very well with your personality. I think this is fantastic. I learned so much about Nuke, about the Icelandic region, Greenland, and what it stands for. I feel like I got a very unique insight into what that is through your own experience. So thank you for sharing that with us. By the way, your photography is stunning. Are these all the images that you took yourself?
I took every single image, and well, first of all, thank you so much. I think the most challenging part of this whole presentation, I told Katie this, I told my friends this, I told everyone this, was narrowing it down.
Yeah.
Just narrowing it down. So there's so much more.
I imagine, astonishing images, very often I think that what's beautiful about what we see in front of us is that you're giving us a bit of background and education as to what we're looking at. I think it's far too easy to look at an image and depict from it, call it our perceived notions of what we're looking at. But first of all, hearing about the story of how the church, for example, a museum, or even the visitor center took place, and learning about what is important gives us such richness. And I think, what do you think about that? Because obviously you're seeing the culture, the context, and everything driving those elements. What do you take away from that? How do you think we can even here in the US, maybe Colorado, Dallas, learn from that?
Well, I think we can do things like this more often with each other. I don't think that you need to wait for someone to give you an assignment. I think that we lose it. We lose that I say that personally, from personal experience. When we graduate school, we go into the workplace, and it's so easy to just be, and this is maybe a good thing, but you're so focused in your own career that you forget to also give yourself exercises such as this to keep your mind fresh. I hope I'm answering your question, but I would hope my answer is really just keep exploring, keep gathering experiences and interpret that in your own way, but also share it with people, because different people will take different things from your experience, very much like this experience. Someone in the room can take something completely different from this, and that's really powerful, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. And very often, I think, from my thoughts anyways, I feel that we must experience things with intent, right? With this context, that what is it that we're looking at it? How did it get here? And what does that mean for us? I recall, I think reading through your report, they actually had an encounter with the Northern Lights, essentially. Tell me about that. Well, I didn't see any of that. I see some of those images.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
That was not in this presentation because I want y'all to go read the report.
There you go. More to come. Fantastic.
No, I really do, Clemente. And that's a really great question. And yes, that was intentional. If you look on the Instagram, you'll see just like snippets. And then the report, it really gives you, I think, the most detailed out of everything, because you can read it at your own pace. The presentation is a little bit more condensed. However, yes, I got to see the Northern Lights, and that was on after I was exiting one of the international film festival showings, one of the movies, and so it's really cool. You're walking out of a building that was inspired by the Northern Lights. It's mid-September, and I actually even downloaded an application that predicts Northern Light showings. So I was like trying not to be rude, but also like, okay, are they coming?
When are they showing up?
Exactly. But nature, you cannot always just try to predict everything. So the moment I let go and I said, okay, no more, pay attention,
be in the moment.
I forgot about it. And when I walked out of the center, I look up at the sky and I see a hue of green.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, no way. And I keep walking to a darker zone, just keep walking. And it's by the boardwalk that I showed you guys, actually. But I was by the boardwalk when I saw the Northern Lights in green, and they're glorious green. And a little funny story on that is that I learned this from Pilu. She's scared of the Northern Lights. She's scared of the Northern Lights because as a child, and in Greenlandic mythology, if you are outside and the Northern Lights come out, they're going to eat you or take your head. And it's funny because they're so beautiful, and all around the world we think, okay, these Northern Lights are amazing, they're beautiful. People, it's in their bucket list, right? But for them, it was a way for their parents to make sure their kids got home on time in the night.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to get kids to do the right thing.
Right. Yes, they have trouble.
One thing that as you were going through your presentation, there's so many great things that you mentioned, and I think one particular segment that stayed with me was this, and you said this. Maybe you quoted from some other place, but I thought it was beautiful. Architecture that speaks of the place and its time. And I think I saw so much of that in the way you described the history and the richness of the places, the textures, right? And I thought that was so beautiful. So I just wanted to mention that. We do have one question from one of our attendants. And the question is, how did visiting Greenland change your perspective of Greenland? Okay. How did visiting Greenland change your perspective of Greenland after studying it for months from the outside?
Okay, that's a great question, Iran. I knew you were going to have a question today.
Yeah.
And before Greenland, my perspective was, who would live there and why? But again, it was those questions that pushed me to the direction of finding out. So that's when I took to Instagram, a very powerful tool. And I didn't want a filtered outlook from an article online, because I went through so many articles, but you're always going to get something that has been massaged and filtered, right? I wanted the first person perspective, or what do people put out there? And so to answer your question, truly, I had no idea what to expect. I'm like, who lived there and why? Who are they? But afterwards, I see them as the most resilient and adaptable people on the planet. That's how I see them.
You know, and there's something to be learned there, because very often, you know, obviously in our culture, we, and maybe I'm speaking in general, but we don't adapt very well. And all this in the context that we actually make our environment adapt to us. Take, for example, it's kind of the heat waves that we have around us. What do? Well, more AC, more water, more this, more that, right? Instead of embracing and to some extent learning how to cope with it. So I thank you for that answer.
No, thank you for that addition. That is exactly how I see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We have one more question, and I think we may come to a conclusion here. So we got a great, this is from Iran Mejia. So thank you, Belén. We got a great glimpse into changing landscape, both from the physical and cultural point of view. How would you characterize the general attitude of Greenlanders, who are, importantly, at the forefront of climate change?
So there's actually, I could do a whole other presentation on this topic. I'm actually like getting into the.
We should, let's do it.
But there's actually two very opposing views. There's that of those who think this is horrible, we're doomed. And that's generally the older generations. What I've seen just in conversations, but also on social media, is people have come to terms with the fact we cannot change it nor stop it, because they're experiencing twice rising temperatures twice as fast as the rest of the world. So not only are they experiencing it, they're experiencing it intensely. So they have to think on their feet and be quick. And there are people, especially in the south of Greenland, who are open to the idea of extracting minerals once the ice begins to melt. So you're going to have huge energy corporations come in, and the mining will happen. And there's actually, there was a discussion of this during the International Film Festival. Just didn't get to go to that one because I was eating, I was sharing like we were eating well with some locals. See, and that's another story. But again, you have to go read the report, people. Go on the website and check it out. It's really cool. The website has tons, and not only this traveling story, they have also another one from Greece. So I really suggest you go check it out. Anyway, opposing views. You have people who are for it, you have people who are against it, which is not very different than the issues we have here regarding other issues that we don't need to get into. But there are people who see an economic value, and the government, I would say, is one of them, which is why, from my observations, I think people are pushing for tourism, because out of the two, which do you rather put your energy into, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dangerous chemicals and minerals and really digging the beautiful, pristine Greenland, or something that people can experience, right? So I can't pick sides. It's not my place. These are just my observations.
Well, these are the pivotal moments in a society, and even a place, so remote and fragile, much like you noted on one of the some of the villages that were, basically devoid and left empty, that they were not politically or geolocated in a position where they could take advantage of fishing. So it was abandoned for an industry that was more economically viable. So now they're once in a position to choose what's more economically viable for our people. And what they choose will obviously have a big impact on culture, architecture, and how they develop their environment. So we do have some more questions, but I do want to respect our time so we can ask those questions after the fact. But I do want to ask these two questions, particularly in regards to the scholarship program and the opportunity that you had. So the first question is this, what just your thoughts on the opportunity that you've gotten through the Architecture Foundation Scholarship Program and what that meant for you?
It's honestly, it's a great question. I didn't ever think this was possible. This only felt like a goal that I could reach many years from now. When I could actually fund my own trip. Many years from now, I thought, okay, this will be a goal I can go. I can. This is a goal I can reach, but not right now. And that's just something I told myself. It was not until Amanda, my professor, approached me, hey, you should do this, that I thought, okay, maybe I can do this. So what I took from this whole fellowship is actually to not tell myself that I can't before I don't even try. And that sounds like so rudimentary. It does. But this is such a big opportunity that it felt really far away. It felt unreachable. I thought, wait, how can I actually do this? And then I did do it. So the biggest takeaway is just keep going and try. And that's just a personal note to self. Like, don't ever think, Belén, that something that feels unreachable is not at your reach, because you can get closer by just doing it. And so that's the fellowship provided me with not just a trip to Greenland and this wonderful experience and this opportunity to talk with you all today, but it also gave me this this empowerment that I can apply for the rest of my life, really. I felt really invincible. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not trying to be arrogant, but while I was in Greenland, because I went by myself during international travel during COVID was a nightmare. But anyway, I got through it. So I felt pretty invincible while being careful.
No, we're very excited for you. And, very often in our scholarship program, in our committee, our members that get involved, one of the most gratifying moments is to award scholarships to very, very deserving individuals like yourself and many others. So to those individuals that, that are current donors or would like to donate in the future towards this kind of program, can you talk about why you think that's important and your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, it's passing it forward. It's very simple. I think that, especially coming from a background of always seeking out resources. Growing up, I had everything I needed, and that's it. We never took family vacations. We never took even trips. My first time on an airplane was when I was 23. These are experiences I chased through school, and it was through the resources that school provided. So I do think it's very important that when we, the ones who were once students, you come for as you progress in your life, your career, you do pass it forward, because again, I just identify with also individuals who have benefited a lot from these resources provided by educational entities. So that's very special. It makes a life of a difference.
You bet, you bet. And, and I hope that, you're a stellar individual, and I hope that you will continue to be a role model, continue sharing your experiences, both from what you see today as a design professional, right? And as you say, to pay it forward, to lay the path and the opportunities for others. So we appreciate you giving this amazing presentation to us today. And we are very excited to share this with others. It'll be on our website via other links. Certainly go and read Belén's full report on our ADEX website, dallasadx.org, of course. And with that, Belén, I think we're going to close. We're a little bit past our time, but definitely appreciate your time and everyone online. And thank you.
No, thank you all. Thank you all. And great moderating skills. That's great.
Well, you set it all up. I'm just reacting to the video.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all.